Good afternoon, everyone. My name is William Beer, and I'm a member of the Information Security Forum's planning team based here in New York. Absolutely thrilled to be with you today as we kick off a series of five webinars exploring the importance of cyber resiliency in a defining moment in history. I'm joined by my co-host, David Raviv. David?
Hi, William. Excited to be here. Looking forward to this session and the next four. I've been in the industry for the past 15 years, started my career as a drone pilot, and I promise to provide a tidbit of information about myself every single session. Looking forward to this one as well.
Well, David, thank you. I'm glad you're helping me out on this. We've got a lot to get through, both today and over the next 5 weeks. And so the fact that you're helping and you're co-hosting is greatly, greatly appreciated. So as I said before, these sessions are going to repeat every Tuesday at 12 o'clock Eastern. I know we've got people from other geographies, from other time zones, and we appreciate you connecting in at your mornings or in your evenings. And hopefully you'll be able to connect with us over the following weeks as well. We're going to try and make these sessions as interactive as possible. So both David and I will be watching out for questions and observations, and we'll be taking notes. And we will make sure that we summarize key observations, findings, and questions at the end of the series and provide you with indications and suggestions around how you yourselves could potentially improve your resilience in the organizations that you work for. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Steve Durbin, who I've had the pleasure of working with for many, many years. Good afternoon, Steve. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, William. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too, Steve. And Steve is the managing director of the Information Security Forum based in the UK and has a very, very long history of information security. And if I'm not wrong, Steve, dealing with the intersection between business and information security. You were at Ernst & Young for a while, where I think you were involved in IPOs and mergers. So I think you bring a really unique perspective, which is that crossover point. So it's not just about technology, but it's how information security can better support the business. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, William. And I think that one of the things I've noticed certainly over the last few years is this blending, this merging of the two things very much more than I ever imagined would happen, to be quite honest, as security has become very much more closely aligned and I think integrated into everything that businesses need to do.
Yep, I agree fully with that, Steve. And maybe just before we dive into the session today, maybe one other question for you. What is it that excites you the most about information security or cybersecurity? I mean, what is it that really drives you? I mean, I know you work with an amazing team and for a fantastic organization, but what is it that really gets you going every day?
I think it's the fact that you never actually know how each day is going to turn out from a security standpoint, because things are moving so very, very quickly. And it's that need to always be, I suppose, flexible, to be adapting, to make sure that the team has all that they need as well to be able to meet the challenges that come our way. So it's that continual change, I think, that really excites me.
Excellent, excellent. So for our viewers today, you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a couple of buttons. And there's some reference documents that we've uploaded just for your information. And in particular, there's one document I'd like to draw your attention to. It's the Information Security Forum CISO briefing document, which is called Adapting to a New World. And I found it a fascinating document, and I've already shared it with quite a few of my friends and industry colleagues, and the feedback has been brilliant. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that, please do so. And we're actually going to use that document to help frame the conversation today with Steve. So Steve, maybe to kick off, the first section of that document actually talks about lockdown to downturn, which I thought was really, really interesting. As you deal with many, many large global clients, members, and organizations, what are the biggest pain points that you've seen over the last couple of months in your dealings with these folks?
Yeah, I think that certainly for every organization, the last few months have been pretty trying, pretty difficult. I think that from a security standpoint, CISOs and their teams had to bring up availability of individuals outside of the normal workplace. That was pretty unprecedented on the scale that we're talking about. I think that a lot of organizations had got their continuity plans in place, their crisis management plans, but nobody really anticipated, I think, the degree of change that was going to be required. And now, we're starting to emerge from some of those lockdowns, depending on where you happen to be in the world. Obviously, the stage of coming out of that is different. And we're starting to see now CISOs beginning to focus back on really what did they learn from all of that. So we're seeing a lot of new risk assessments being done on the new environment. Operation models have had to change. We've still got people who are based at home, who are going to be at home for the foreseeable future in some instances. So a lot of risk assessment work now being done, a lot of, I think, rewriting too of policies and procedures to reflect some of the change that we've seen. And I think as well, a lot of the CISOs that I talk to really starting to prepare for what might come next.
That's interesting. And, as I reflect on what I've heard and seen, I've also seen a big uptick in the amount of cloud computing being used, or an acceleration towards the cloud, which I think is positive. And obviously an uptick in cybercrime. I mean, I think the statistics and the numbers speak quite clearly. But my question for you, Steve, is if there's an acceleration into, for example, cloud computing combined with an uptick in cybercrime, why is it that budgets are being, or maybe the question is, are they being cut? But we know they're coming under increased scrutiny. And how should CISOs and organizations think about getting that balance right? Because something doesn't really compute for me.
Yeah, that age-old budget question, it comes up all the time, doesn't it? But you're right, William. Cybercrime, those guys really saw an opportunity. We've seen over in the United States just recently things like unemployment benefit scams. We've seen ransomware at the height of the pandemic, ransomware attacks on hospitals all around the world. The SEC just the other day issued guidance on warning to financial services organizations about an increase in ransomware again. So cyber criminals have not been sleeping during this period. And I think that from the security perspective, from the CISO standpoint, what is really important here is to present a balanced case to business leaders and to the board around how much money is actually required. What I mean by that is if you just take a ransomware incident, the cost of recovery from that, and let's assume that even though it's not recommended, that you did actually pay a ransom, that's just one component of the overall cost that you've incurred. You then have to look at the impact or the damage that's been done to your systems. You have to dig into those in some detail to see whether or not there is still malware sitting on the network. You also need to raise the level of awareness. And if you lost personal data, you may well find that you're now going to be the victim of a class action suit to boot. If you add all of that up, that is a significant amount of money. And so I think from a CISO point of view, it's not about fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's about simply saying, look, these are some of the costs that are involved here. However, we can put in place some really strong guidelines, policies, procedures by spending this amount of money. From a board perspective, from a leadership standpoint, which do you want to do? And that for me is the role of the CISO going forward. It's about providing that kind of consultative advice in a balanced way. And I think that's the sort of thing that the boards are looking for now.
Fascinating. It sounds to me like we're going to have to become best buddies with the CFO moving forward. And we actually had the opportunity to speak to a friend of mine who's a CFO on a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and the feedback was really good. So it does sound to me like we need to get better connected into the CFO community and really, really align with what they're doing and their challenges they're facing right now as well.
Yeah, I would say so. I think the CFO is definitely going to be your best friend going forward.
Yeah. Another question I wanted to ask you, maybe touch on this quickly, is supply chain security. We've been hearing and talking about supply chains and third-party risks for many, many years. And quite frankly, I personally haven't seen a lot of innovation in this space. I still see a lot of fairly traditional third-party risk assessments based on Excel. I know that's changing and there is some innovation in the industry, but there's still a lot of very traditional approaches. At this point in time, with the struggles we're going through and so many supply chains being stressed and strained, are you seeing an uptick or more focus on supply chain security and third-party risk assessments?
Yeah, absolutely, William. As you say, from an ISF standpoint, we've been talking about supply chain now for some years. I think one of the things that the pandemic and the response to it really brought into focus was the fact that perhaps the supply chains you'd been used to operating with were no longer available for whatever reason. So you had to do things like onboard new suppliers. You had to make sure that there was the appropriate level of security across that supply chain when you couldn't go on site. So I think that we've been forced almost into some of this asking for electronic evidence, implementing different systems. And so for me, the pandemic has actually served to perhaps mature some of our thinking in terms of what we might be able to do in terms of ensuring security from end to end across the supply chain.
That's interesting, and I like the fact that you can, reflect on positive aspects of this as well. Maybe one final question before we switch gears, Steve. You have a large team that works for you and that you work alongside. As we go through this, what are you doing from a management perspective to help keep the team motivated and focused? Because I know quality is so important for the Information Security Forum. So what are you doing to help keep your team engaged, motivated, and focused as we all go through these crazy, crazy times?
Yeah, I think I'm in a very fortunate position. I have a very strong team. They work very, very well together. They are dispersed all around the world. And so they are, to a certain extent, used to some of the remote working that we've had to adopt in a much more sort of wholesale fashion. And that's all been good. I think the other thing was that right at the outset, we decided collectively as a group that we were going to continue to provide the same level of service as far as we could to our members. We were going to continue to deliver the same product sets that we promised. We were going to continue to provide the same opportunities for interaction, albeit electronically using this kind of technology as opposed to in person. And we've done that. And the team has been actively involved throughout in terms of how we can innovate through that, how we can really reach out in a number of different ways to our members all around the world. And I think they've also shown a very genuine interest in trying to help members who are dealing with some really thorny challenges of security, over the past few months. And all of that has really helped, I think, the team gel. And then we've been doing things that I'm sure a lot of other organizations have been doing. We've been, running things like, coffee hours and remote meetups. And I talk to the team myself at least once a week collectively. And my leadership team do that as well. So we break that out. And it's about constant communication, I think, and highlighting, as you say, opportunities.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's very useful. And I wanted to remind people, please feel free to send us your questions or observations. I see lots of feedback coming in, which is great, but feel free to shoot us questions as well, and we'll make sure we take those into account. Steve, I want to switch gears now and talk a little bit about beyond response. So the document that I referred to before, again, which is at the bottom of the screen, the ISF CISO briefing document, talks about the necessity or the need to begin to adapt, right, to this new normal, if we can use that term. And based on that adaptation, what are your thoughts around, and maybe what are you hearing again from your members and the organizations you're dealing with in terms of the top 2 to 3 challenges or things that they should be doing now to adapt? What are your thoughts on that? Can you share your perspective?
Yeah, certainly, William. I think that one of the things that I've seen is our members really looking much more at this whole issue of cyber resilience. What does that actually mean for us in the new environment? And you'll be very familiar with the ISF framework around here that says, well, let's start by looking at governance and partnering and making sure that those things are in place. Moving on to having a really good means of understanding situational awareness. That obviously from an ISF standpoint means that our members talk to each other, they talk to us, but also including public authorities in that. as well. And then the really important piece is the resilience assessment. You know, how equipped are you to respond to, if it were to happen again, things that happened in the past, things that you can see happening now, and then let's look a little bit into the future and use things like the threat horizon report, some of those more forward-looking things that the ISF produces to help again frame some of the risk assessments. And then finally, it's about putting in place your response around that. So a number of the CISOs that I talk to are certainly focusing down on that now. You know, how do we, as I said slightly earlier, really prepare for the next stage, whatever that happens to look like.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. I mean, here in the United States, we've seen that resiliency is becoming top of mind, primarily, at least with my dealings with financial service organizations. And quite frankly, a lot of the organizations were looking to the UK for guidance because of some of the good work that was coming out of the Bank of England and others. But it does appear to me to still be fairly, how can I say, fragmented, the approach, and in its infancy. And I still seem to see that there's a bit of a misconception that cyber resiliency is really just BC and DR and steroids. Do you think that's fair, or am I being too harsh?
You know, I think that one of the things I've learned, William, is that individual organizations are just that. We can provide all of the guidance in the world, as indeed can the Bank of England, the SEC. It doesn't matter who it is, wherever you happen to be in the world. Ultimately, individual organizations have to make the call as to how they want to best equip themselves to do two things: to deliver their business strategy and to deliver it in a way where they are protecting the information assets that really go to make them different. And if we think about that within the context of financial services, that opens up a huge range of opportunity, yes, but also something of a Pandora's box, because we're also trying to differentiate, you know, between one bank and another, between one insurance company and another. And so all of these things for me are really starting to come together. And this is why I made the comment right at the top of the show there about the fact that, you know, this combination of business and technology, business and security, has been something that surprised me somewhat. And I think that really is coming alive today in some of the instances that you've shown. So the response that is made is going to be down to the individual organization. And that's going to require the CISO to be hand in glove with the business leadership of that organization and the board. And that's the sort of thing I think that I find really exciting, bringing together all of those different component pieces to come up with a personalized solution using some of the tools and the techniques, the frameworks and the methods that the ISF is providing.
Yeah, I again couldn't agree with you more. For many years, we've been talking about the interaction between the CISO and the rest of the C-suite and better engagement at the board. I still recall the ISF deliverable, I think it's from 2013, engaging with the board. And I refer to that document frequently. And a very good friend of mine from Brazil, he's told me, he worked for a big US bank, he told me he kept it on by his bedside table. It was such a useful document. But it stuns me and surprises me that it's taken so long to get to this point. So maybe, again, trying to put our optimist hats on, this pandemic is going to bring some positive good change around getting better connected with the rest of the C-suite. We mentioned the CFO as an example, but more importantly, getting better engaged with the board, because I think there's so much more that needs to be done. One final question, again, before we switch gears. What about response, Steve? Because it appears to me, and you talked previously around ransomware and paying and not paying, it would appear to me that a lot of organizations still struggle in terms of their response to incidents, and they tend to bungle it. They struggle. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of players, the communication, which is something we're going to touch on in one of the subsequent sessions. We've got a brilliant guest speaker from Brunswick, Siobhan Gorman, who's going to talk about communicating in a crisis. But what I've seen, based on my own experience, is a lot of organizations struggle even in the best of times. How do you think organizations are geared up to respond to an incident now when they can't go to a war room and everything has to be done virtually, including interacting with their trusted partners. Have you seen, a good example of that, or do you think that's an area that needs to be focused on by our viewers and listeners today?
I think it's an area that we need to continue to focus on, William. I don't see it as a do it once, put it on the shelf, and then go grab it when a crisis hits. Because everything is moving so quickly, everything is changing so rapidly within the organization and outside. So it is all about, for me, getting the playbook down so that you can rehearse it, so that you can learn from some of the things. And again, trying to take a positive from the pandemic, there is a huge amount of learnings that organizations can take from the way in which they responded to the pandemic in terms of moving their staff into a home environment, which was completely alien for a lot of them, in terms of enabling cloud infrastructure, which for some they had not done, in terms of balancing things like the confidentiality. As I said earlier, it was all about availability. But what about confidentiality of information? What about the integrity of the information? How do we make sure that, again, in a similar sort of crisis situation, we can do those sorts of things? And I think one of the things that struck me was that when I had been talking previously to, say, a financial institution in Manhattan, and we talked about their backup, then they would say, yeah, it's across the river. So we can move people from Manhattan across into New Jersey and we can get up and going again. Or they might have had an operation down in Florida, and at the time of a hurricane, you could relocate the service somewhere else. Well, this was a truly global pandemic. It struck everywhere. And so you didn't have that ability to shift services and so on. You had to make some of that up, in the moment. Let's be honest about it. That's a fantastic learning in terms of crisis response. So build that into the playbook and keep refreshing it, keep taking it up to the highest of levels in the organization and stress testing it.
That makes a lot of sense. And, you mentioned Florida. I see a question coming in from Florida right now, which I'll read off, and maybe you can take a stab at it, Steve. What can CISOs do to properly advocate for cyber resiliency in their organizations, avoiding the risk of transforming it into just another buzzword? Very good question. Can you offer some insight and thoughts on that?
It is a good question. And I think that one of the things that I would say is that as an industry, we're great at doing just that. So how do we avoid that? I think it's about relating what we're talking about from the security standpoint to the business. We have to learn to speak from a security perspective, the language of the business. The business is not going to learn security. We have to teach ourselves to be able to communicate better in the language they understand. What will that look like? Well, it does mean that we have to align what we're doing with the strategic direction that the company is taking. What does that mean? Well, it means that we're probably going to have to relate our services from the security perspective back to the new products perhaps that the company is trying to introduce, whatever shareholder value might look like for them. But what I've found is when security people are able to do that, everything suddenly shifts a gear because suddenly people get it. I'm on a merger and acquisition trail. I'm just about to acquire a company. All too often, security is brought in at the last minute to do the cleanup. Well, what about introducing it much earlier? Because there's a cost associated with that. There are a number of different instances that I can talk about where acquisitions have really not delivered because once the acquisition has been done, the deal has been done, security has got in there and found there are some real challenges to just making things like networks talk together, to making systems talk together. And all of the potential value that was going to come about disappears. So for me, it's about trying to articulate cyber resilience in the language of the business, in the language of the individual business leaders, and about getting their input into some of the challenges that they're facing and just testing out with them how some of the proposals that the security team might be making would impact the business. Would it help? Would it slow things down? And really digging into those. It's about having some fairly open, transparent conversations with them before you actually get in there and try to implement some of these things.
Really useful. And I will make sure that we capture that in our debriefing document that we share with people, because I think that's a great question and a great set of recommendations that I think need to be shared with the wider group after this series. I'm conscious of time, Steve, and I know we've only got about 3 minutes left, but maybe the final thing I'd like to ask you, and again, the document touched on also the need to begin to think about resuming, which I thought was really powerful and again, optimistic. So as we go through this hopefully phase and hopefully accelerated phase of recovery and we get to resume, what should CISOs be thinking about and where should they begin to focus their time and energy now to make sure that they're better placed to resume when we do begin to come out of this crisis?
Yeah, and I think that for me, in the briefing document there, we highlight a number of different things. For me, it's about, I think, making sure that the basics are down, that things like your governance is appropriate, because it will potentially have changed in the light of some of the things that you've learned. It's about understanding really what kind of an infrastructure and services you're able now to provide or need to provide going forward to your end users, to your business colleagues. That will take you into areas like supply chain, for instance. We've talked about that. But you shouldn't also forget the workforce. The workforce is having to contend with a whole range of different ways of trying to work and adapt. And so again, it's about really, I think, taking every opportunity to reach out to them, to raise their level of awareness, to deal with some of the concerns that they're having about how they can operate effectively, safely, securely in what will be yet another new environment for them.
Excellent. Well, listen, Steve, I know you've got to dash, so I wanted to thank you for kicking off this first of 5 series of webinars. As I said before, we've got an incredibly diverse mixture of very senior folks who are going to join us over the next couple of days. So, Steve, thank you for your time today. I'll close this down for now, but thank you again. We appreciate your help and the insight you've shared with us.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, William. Nice talking to you as always. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Steve. Stay safe. Well, listen, I really do want to thank above all, the participants for joining us today. I know, and I saw a lot of people dialing in and connecting from different parts of the world. So we appreciate the time. We appreciate the questions. Really hope you're able to join us next Tuesday for our follow-on session and the subsequent ones. At this point in time, I would be amiss if I didn't mention and thank also our sponsors, Recorded Future and Beyond Trust, who are helping us to make sure that we get all of this supported and up and running. So big thanks to our sponsors. But please feel free to reach out to the ISF. There's contact details on the registration page if you have any additional questions or observations that you weren't able to share with us today. And at this point in time, I want to thank you all and look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. Goodbye. And thanks again.